So we are in the course of considering an argument for descriptive egoism. Descriptive egoism says that each person is always motivated to do whatever at least they believe is in their own self-interest. And we were considering whether or not it's true that we always want to do what is most in our own, or what we believe is most in our own self-interest. And the problem for that claim is that we do appear to have altruistic motivations that concern the interests and rights of others. According to the descriptive egoist, these apparently altruistic motivations are disguised or derivative from egoistic motivations. The real or fundamental motivations concern our self-interest in two ways. They concern our moral feelings, and they concern how others will treat us. So when it looks like a motivation is altruistic and really out of concern for others, actually it's out of concern for our own moral feelings and out of concern for how others will treat us. So we need to see, okay, how can the descriptive egoist fill out these claims about what look like altruistic motivations? So when you keep your promise to someone out of an apparently altruistic motivation, what's really going on? According to the descriptive egoist, this is what's really going on. Why do you do it? You do it because, on the one hand, if you do keep your promise, you'll feel proud, you'll have a good moral feeling about yourself, and that'll be a good feeling. And the person who you keep the promise to may be pleased. They might not, but they may be. If you don't keep your promise, you will feel guilty, and that feels bad. You don't want that. And the person will be mad at you, and they won't trust you. And other people may be mad at you and not trust you. And so your motivations in this case, which supposedly are out of concern and respect for the other person, in fact are to make them happy, to make other people happy, and to make yourself happy, and to avoid other people being angry, and to avoid feelings of shame and guilt. And that would all be, in fact, self-interested. So let's get into these two egoistic motivations, and more specifically, supposedly egoistic motivations. And specifically, let's get into the moral feelings motivation. The concern for how others will treat us motivation, we're going to discuss that in the next module because that bleeds into some issues having to do with ethical egoism. But right now, we're going to talk about you have these moral feelings of pride and shame. How are they involved in motivation? Are they involved in a way that makes moral motivation egoistic? Are they involved in egoistic ways? So you might have pride or satisfaction at doing the right thing. You feel good about yourself when you help other people, when you keep your promises, and so on, and rightly so. On the other hand, you might feel guilt or shame when you do what you think is incorrect, when you do what you think is wrong, and when you hurt others or don't respect them. So the descriptive egoist says your motivation for altruistic action is always and only to get good moral feelings and to avoid bad moral feelings. So you're acting in a way that does benefit other people, that is that respects them, that doesn't harm them, and so on. Why are you doing it though? You're not doing it because it's important to you to respect them or to not harm them or to help them. You're doing it because you want to feel good about yourself and you don't want to feel bad about yourself. So my motivations are always about my own feelings in this way, says the descriptive egoist, and that means that the appearance of altruistic motivation is an illusion. It looks like I care about you, but actually I don't. I only care about my own feelings. So there are two problems with this moral feelings idea. First, moral satisfaction and moral guilt are themselves manifestations of altruism, and secondly, moral feelings often don't outweigh other self-interests. So if the only reason why I was acting morally was because I cared about my own moral feelings, I actually wouldn't act morally because there are other things that are more important to my self-interest than my moral feelings. So let's consider the first point. Moral satisfaction and moral guilt are manifestations of altruism. So what's the source in general of satisfaction and frustration when we act? So let's consider an example. If I get a massage, then I get the pleasure of a massage, and that might cause me to have a desire for a massage. So let's say I actually get the massage. Well, okay, the massage is going to cause the pleasure of the massage, right? It's physically pleasant. It's also going to cause a sense of satisfaction of getting what I want. But that satisfaction is not why I act. The feeling of satisfaction is not what the basic motivation. The basic motivation is the pleasure. it's the potential pleasure that gives me the desire, and then the feeling of satisfaction is derivative from the pleasure from the desire. So the desire of the pleasure of the massage, that generates the desire, or the potential pleasure generates the desire, and then when I actually get the massage and have the pleasure, then that further gives me satisfaction. So the point is that that satisfaction at the end, that's not my goal. Then my goal is the pleasure, and the satisfaction is derivative from my having that goal and having that and then getting that goal. Or consider I create a video like this video. Well, I might feel satisfaction because I like the video, or I might feel frustration because I don't like the video. So these feelings of satisfaction and frustration, they're derivative. I'm motivated fundamentally by the quality of the video, and the satisfaction that I feel depends upon my assessment of the video, and it's the video that I most fundamentally care about, and that's what's most fundamentally motivating me. So the object of what you want is fundamental. So things we think we need, things we think are good, we want them because we think they're good or because we think we need them. And the satisfaction then comes from getting something good. And so in general, we get satisfaction from getting what we want and frustration from not getting what we want, but the satisfaction depends upon the object of the want. Right? So the pleasure makes me satisfied, the quality of the video, and my concern for the quality of the video is what makes me satisfied or frustrated. So the satisfaction in these cases is not the goal, or at least if it's a goal, it's a derivative goal. It's not the most fundamental goal. So what does this have to do with the descriptive egoist? Well, let's look at the motivation to keep a promise. So in the moral motivation, I have, well, I want to keep my promise to X, and the question is why? Well, you will feel proud if you do keep your promise, perhaps, and shame if you don't. But why? Because you think it's good to keep promises to others and bad to keep them. That's why you feel the moral pride and why you feel the moral shame. It's because you have this evaluation of promises. You think it's good to keep promises to other people and bad to break them. So your fundamental motivation is what? It's the goodness and badness of the promises, and not the feeling of pride or shame. So just like in the massage case, there's the pleasure of the massage, and then the satisfaction from getting the massage. So in the moral case, there's the goodness or badness of the promise, and then the satisfaction or frustration of keeping the promise or not. So in both cases, there's the pleasure or the moral goodness or badness, and then there's the satisfaction and frustration after the fact. So what that means is that our fundamental moral wants are altruistic. We have feelings of moral satisfaction and frustration. Why? Because we care about others' interests, because we respect them and their independence. This is altruistic caring. If you imagine someone who didn't care about others at all, that person would be a psychopath. That person would be a very scary person to be around. You would not want to be around that person at all because they'd be completely manipulative and not sort of have a basic sort of respect for you and basic sense of looking out for you. So while it's true that when we care about others and then we act in ways that either harm them or don't, we then have these feelings of moral pride maybe or moral shame, that's only because we have this more fundamental concern for them. And the person who doesn't have the concern for them is very scary and is not altruistic at all. And that sort of demonstrates how important these sort of basic concerns are for other people that give us our feelings of satisfaction and not. So we might think that caring is sharing. Perhaps by caring about others' interests, we adopt them, and in that sense, our sense of self-interest expands. So that what's important to me now is not just my own welfare, but the welfare of others. And so, in some sense, I have a broader self-interest. That would still be importantly altruistic, right? Because it's like, oh, I can take on others' interests, as opposed to not being able to. I can recognize other people's interests as important. To me, well, so my sense of self expands. That's the bad thing. That's a good thing. That's me sort of bringing other people into my world. So we can summarize this by saying that moral feelings derive from altruistic motivation and not the other way around. The moral feelings are derivative. We have the altruistic motivation is more basic and primary. Now, the descriptive egoist may be somewhat cynical and say, no, you're being way too optimistic about human nature. You don't feel shame because what you did was wrong. You don't feel pride because what you did was right. You feel shame because you've been trained to feel shame. You don't actually care about other people. You've just been trained to feel shame. You've been trained to punish yourself, and the reason why you don't harm other people is because you're afraid of this self-punishment. You act morally just to avoid this feeling you've been conditioned to have, and not because you think that promise breaking is actually bad or wrong. Well, okay, sometimes, yeah, that's correct, right? We are conditioned to have these feelings, and they may have some sense, they may operate to some extent independently of our moral evaluations of the acts in question, right? Whether or not promise breaking is bad, I'm going to feel shame about doing it, and that's why I don't do it, just because I'm conditioned to feel shame and I don't want to feel the shame. But is that always the case? Is it always the case that it's just how we've been conditioned and trained to feel, and the feeling of shame doesn't spring from a deeper motivation and a moral evaluation? Well, look, I mean, think about it this way. Do you want to lose your care for others? If the descriptive egoists were right, then your care for others is just getting in the way. It's just giving you these feelings of shame and pride, and that's really all it's doing. And if you got rid of it, then you wouldn't be constrained by those feelings of pride and shame, and you could just maximize all of your other feelings. Well, if that's an unattractive option to you, as I think it is, then you are not, in fact, you're not so cynical, and you think, okay, maybe sometimes I'm motivated just to avoid the feeling of shame, or just get the feeling of pride. But if you have that deeper identification with your motivations, then you don't buy into the cynical line. And I think that the descriptive egoist needs some sort of argument to say that it's always the case that when pride and shame, moral pride and moral shame are in the picture, they're purely conditioned and not coming from some deeper moral motivation on your part. So maybe the descriptive egoist is right about this sometimes, but they need to make a much stronger claim. They need to say it's always like this, and I just don't. It seems implausible, and I don't see the argument for it. Maybe the argument can be made out, but it would need to be made out. Okay, so moral feelings are altruistic. They arise because we care about and are motivated by others' interests and rights. So let's briefly look at the second problem for the moral feelings, our egoistic approach. So the problem is that moral feelings often don't outweigh other self-interests. So let's think about the strength of moral feelings. So the descriptive egoist says your motivation for acting morally is a self-interested desire for morally good feelings. Okay, what does that mean though? It means, but when you act morally, you're often acting in ways that besides the morally good feelings is not in your self-interest, right? You repay the loan, you keep the promise, you don't lie, and on the one hand, you feel morally good because you didn't lie, and you repaid the loan, and you kept your promise, and you don't feel moral guilt about having done the wrong thing. But there are other ways in which your self-interest would seem to be set back, right? You don't have as much money, maybe you're embarrassed, you keep the promise, you're not able to do other things that you would enjoy. So the descriptive egoist has to say that the benefit of moral feeling is greater than all the benefits of the immoral action, right? Always. And that seems wrong. So consider a case of self-sacrifice. So most people will run into burning buildings to save people, and they will die, and sometimes they put their life in danger and they may die. People will jump into cold rivers to save other people, putting their life in danger. Soldiers will put themselves in mortal danger for the sake of their comrades. So people sometimes sacrifice their lives for others and certainly put themselves at risk for others. And often they'll talk about if they happen to survive after having put themselves in one of these extremely dangerous positions. Part of it is, well, this is just what I would do, and I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't. Well, the descriptive egoist has to say that that's literally right, what that person says, that the feeling of guilt will be so bad that life would not be worth living. Now, maybe in some cases it would, but I think in most cases it wouldn't be. It would be perhaps very bad, but that life would be, this feeling of guilt will be so bad that it will be literally not worth living, that's an awful feeling. So we can think of this as two options. If you sacrifice yourself, you lose your life. If you don't sacrifice yourself, then you're going to survive, and you're going to feel guilty, but it seems at least possible that life would still be worth living. So it's in your self-interest not to sacrifice, because however bad that feeling of guilt is, in many cases it's not so bad as to make your life not worth living. And there are less extreme cases of this. So if you, let's say you repay a loan, or you're not lying about something embarrassing, so you would feel guilty. Maybe you would, maybe you have a real conscience, but I assume you would. But how bad is that guilty feeling that motivates you to, tell the truth about something embarrassing and repay the loan? Well, does that guilty feeling you're avoiding, is it necessarily worse than the embarrassment or the loss of money? Not necessarily, right? Yeah, you're going to feel a little bit guilty if you lie, but the embarrassment is more intense, but you're willing to be embarrassed because you think, it's important to me to not lie. It's important to these other people as well to not lie. Or I return the money, and that's going to negatively affect me, and it's going to negatively affect me more than the guilt I would feel if I didn't return the money. So the descriptive egoist has to claim you have extraordinarily strong feelings of guilt, and that doesn't seem obvious at all. Okay, so let's pull back and summarize what we have seen in this module. So we have this argument, the wants argument for descriptive egoism. The first premise says you always do what you most want to do. The second premise says you always most want to do what you believe is in your self-interest. And the conclusion is that you always act selfishly, doing what you believe is in your self-interest. So the really contentious premise is the second one. Premise 2, you always most want to do what you believe is in your self-interest. And it looks like there are, so let's sort of, I'm going to want to sort of review the argument that we've been through at the back and forth, because it might be a little bit complicated. And so I'm going to have the egoist claims in violet and the altruist replies in blue. So the egoist says, premise 2, you always most want to do what you believe is in your self-interest. Altruist says, and we saw this in the previous video, no, we're motivated by others' interests. We care about other people, they're the object of our motivations sometimes, and so we're not always motivated by our self-interest, or purely by our self-interest. The egoist says, but I got you, because those supposedly altruistic motivations, they're really egoistic. And what we've been looking at right now is the claim they're actually really to get good moral feelings and avoid bad moral feelings. And the altruist says, those good moral feelings, they don't, the fact that they're involved in our action, that doesn't make us egoistic. On the one hand, the moral feelings are a consequence of genuine altruistic concern. So if we have these moral feelings, that's because actually we're altruistic. We really do genuinely care about others' welfare and so on. And also, the goodness or badness of the moral feelings don't always outweigh the costs and benefits of moral action. So yeah, I might feel bad if I do the immoral thing, but the benefits for me of doing the immoral thing are a lot greater than however bad I would feel. And so if all I cared about were the benefits I would get and how I will feel morally, then I would do the immoral thing. But I don't do the immoral thing, which means that I must actually care more about actually the other person's interests. So to summarize this, the descriptive egoist claims that all of our fundamental motivations are egoist. There are two ways moral motivation is supposed to be egoist. We act out of concern for our own moral feelings and how others will treat us. We've seen, I think, that moral motivation doesn't seem to come from concern for our own moral feelings. We have the moral feelings of pride and shame, but those are not the only things that drive us to act. We care about others we have those moral feelings because we care about others, and that more fundamental care is part of why we act in a lot of cases. Well, could moral motivation then also come from concern about how others will treat us? That's what the descriptive egoist wants to suggest. Well, maybe. Stay tuned. That's what we will be discussing in the next module.